As you can see right there, Mr. Garba Shehu joins us this morning. He's Senior Special Assistant on Media and Publicity in the Office of the President. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You know, I'm pretty sure you listened to a little bit of the previous conversation. Would you want to give any response to any of the things that you heard?
Well, first of all, let me say, I don't want to be questioning the gentleman patriotism. I know he's Nigerian himself, is entitled to. But it's amazing that someone would sit down for more than half an hour saying negative things all through about his country. This man does not see one thing about Nigeria. He didn't say it, even he had. And I think he needs help, honestly speaking. And should I suggest to him, let him go around for office. That's why democracy is the best system of government. If you have people in office and they are not getting it right, so put yourself up, run for office, defeat them in election, come and do it better. This man cannot, I don't want to make assumptions, but you can't sit down there and just say, absolutely nothing works in the country. And so what does he want Nigerians to do? Buy air ticket and japa? Is that what he wants? Or he wants Nigerians to cry and despair? I have seen nothing to inspire anyone from his speech. And I feel sad that somebody who has achieved so much in this country, given his position and assume success that he has achieved in business, I think that he needs to revise his own, look at everything and decide whether he really can take a look at some other pictures and not be fixated with negatives.
Perhaps, Mr. Shehu, the challenge is in the communication by government. Most of the time, I mean, we've seen the highlights of the Buhari government that was published from the communication team of the president, highlights between 2015 and 2022 or 2023. Perhaps the challenge is not whether or not government did something. Perhaps the challenge is that of communicating to people to the point that they will accept that indeed government has done something that really touched their lives.
Yeah, I believe that yes, a problem of communication. But essentially, this problem is also the fact that journalism, so long as that rule in journalism remains that bad news is good news, we'll continue to be where we are.
Well, it is one thing to put the news out. It's another thing altogether for the people involved in this particular news to be able to come out and say, it's not exactly the way it is. You are not unaware that people have complained themselves hoarse. Let's take a few issues. Unemployment. The figure has always been on the increase. Once we had a conversation with you, Mr. Garba, asking the question around the number of people that have been pulled out of poverty when the president promised in 2018, was it 2019, that he was going to pull 100 million out of poverty, 100 million Nigerians out of poverty over 10 years in partnership with the states. We had a conversation with you after like 3 years of that, asking how far so far. You said, there was no figure. Education, many people are complaining about that one. Health, a good number of people go out of the country. In fact, just on education, we've seen the budgets that people have to spend outside of Nigeria, even in Sudan, just because they want education. Health. People leave the country simply because they want better health for themselves. So the figures are all out there for people, things that touch the direct lives of people. So with these realities that Nigerians see, those highlights that you put out there, saying this is what the Buhari government has done, is just paper. That's what some people would say. How do you respond?
It is paper because essentially also the medium can be the message. If the communication channel is cluttered and is cacophonous, or it's not even listening, then you will have a problem in having end-to-end communication. So, but let's go into some of the numbers that you are talking about, or the gentleman who just left was speaking about. I was amazed that he was attributing to Femi Additional that Femi said only 100,000 jobs had been created by Buhari in 8 years. That cannot be true. I mean, if only he would care to check. This thing is on YouTube, and the numbers are there. In agriculture alone, the Rice Farmers Association of Nigeria, RIFA, is talking about 12 million new jobs. Look at what we did with fertilizer. This administration inherited just 4 functional fertilizer processing companies. We have 52 that are working today. And these 52 are supplying fertilizer to, let's say, this 12 million new rice farmers. Today, rice farmers alone domestically produce between 8 to 9 million paddy rice, which is feeding rice mills. The last count I had from Kano alone, they had 62 new rice mills that hadn't existed before. We have over 100 in Nigeria, and this things north and south. And the enormous number of jobs that have been created from this is simply is amazing. And this country has literally achieved food self-sufficiency. We have diversified the economy. We're no longer a monocultural economy. And somebody would just sit down there and just tell you there is nothing about Nigeria. No.
Mr. Shehu, let's take the conversation away from the young man. Let's focus on the issues that are being raised right now. I mean, speak to those issues. I mean, you're speaking right now to agriculture, which you didn't raise, and that's fine. But speak to education, speak to health, speak to inflation, speak to, I mean, everyone, a good number of people will give it to government that, you know, infrastructure has been fairly okay. Speak to the partnership with the state, speak to security. Those issues, Mr. Shehu, you know, you're a journalist as well. They are the realities that people encounter on a daily basis.
Give me time, I will address those
Go ahead.
issues.
Let's see how much you can cover.
Well, when we came in 2015, this security, the country was broken into pieces because you had Boko Haram territory created out of this country with the headquarters in Goza, a country with a flag and system of administration and taxation the size of Belgium in the northeast. 17 of 27 local governments of Borno State had been conquered, and no road outside Maiduguri leading to any part of the country other than Kano, Maiduguri, Kano Road was under the control of the state. All the others had been controlled by Boko Haram. Why is that republic, the Boko Haram tradition? It has simply. And the preoccupation of government, as we speak today, how do we put back people in those communities? IDP camps are being shut down. Buildings they are rebuilding roads and schools and places of worship and markets, things that have been destroyed, and all those roads. That's one aspect of it. Now, I spoke to you about agriculture. This country had spent $5 million before this administration every day to buy foreign rice. Today, not $1 leaves the Central Bank of Nigeria to go and procure rice. Look at what we did with power. Power availability in homes, distribution was 2,500 megawatts. Today, between 4,000 and 5,000 is available every day. And even this is just a 1/4 of availability, because power availability in the country is about 20,000 megawatts as we speak. And the problem is evacuation. Distribution is the key issue. And this is why the administration went into this strategic partnership with Germany, who have sent Siemens and massive transformers, meters are coming into the country so that the power we are able to generate that is dormant, that we're even planning to sell to neighboring countries, because nobody is using it at home. We can distribute and take around. So there's so much that we have done, but the thing is that if somebody decides to say they will stay on the negatives, you can't help them.
Well, Mr. Shehu, I'd like us to return to the issue of agriculture. You spoke earlier about how Nigeria has achieved food sufficiency, and you talked about the efforts towards shoring up agriculture in the area of rice. I'd like to remind you, by the way, that, a bag of rice is still hovering between 45,000 naira and 50,000 naira, a far cry from what it was at the time that your administration, the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari, came on board. It was somewhere between 5 and 10,000 naira. So I'd like to ask why, in spite of the border closure policies of the government and the efforts of the government in the area of development of rice farming, the price of rice has not been able to come down. And it's debatable also, just to add to that, I'd like you to speak to it, that Nigeria has achieved food sufficiency. Inflation is hitting 22%, which is, by the way, fueled by food inflation. So I'd like you to speak to all of these issues. I wonder if you're talking about the same Nigeria when you speak, glowingly about the efforts of the outgoing administration in the area of food sufficiency.
Of course, we're speaking of the same Nigeria. We are not speaking of the Nigeria in the moon as addressed by the previous speaker, Wale Kosinsa. My sense is that we have to look at what is happening in the country in the context of global situation. There is a global cost of living crisis that is rocking the entire world. And this is very easy to see. When coronavirus epidemic came and locked down nations of the world, everyone was isolated. Virtually all nations were isolated from each other. This affected everything. Let's talk about this fertilizer, because it feeds agriculture output, then pricing are affected by the input. We were buying phosphate from Morocco and from Russia. And at the time the program of the presidential fertilizer program took off, this administration had the audacity to even brand the price of the controlled price of fertilizer on each bag with the telephone number, that this will sell for 5,500. If anyone should sell at above 5,500, call this number and report to them, and they will be actioned. Something will be done about it. Today, fertilizer is about 14,000. If you buy fertilizer at 14,000, it will obviously reflect on what you sell, the rice that you produce and sell. And why is it so? Because of what followed coronavirus lockdown, the crisis that it generated in the supply chain globally, and particularly in the last 2 or so years. The Ukraine-Russia war had also an implication for us, because then the relief that we're getting, additional phosphate from Russia, we can no longer obtain that. So our people are going to as far as Canada, and if you see the prices, they're just so high. But to keep their plants running, they keep buying. So the point is that if the cost of input is high, arising from the crisis that is global, Nigeria is not immune to this global challenge. It's not immune.
Mr. Shehu, that could also, the argument could also go, back and forth, where you talk about, the crisis affecting, the economy and the agricultural sector. For instance, amid the Russia-Ukraine war, there have been deals signed to ensure that Ukraine continues to export its grain. So we wonder where Nigeria's creativity is amid all of these challenges. But let's also look at another aspect of the administration as we continue to reflect towards the winding down of the Buhari administration. The perception is about the outgoing president's inability to manage the diversities of Nigerians, and him being emotionally disconnected, from Nigerians, his penchant to be able to travel out, to jet out of the country, even amid insecurity and attacks in the country. How is the administration processing this feedback?
Well, let me say that if you are talking about attacks and terrorism, philosophically, globally, and this is global, terrorism is supposed to stop governance, it's supposed to undermine society, it's supposed to abort normalcy in societies. So if your president decides that he's no longer going to go to Ghana for ECOWAS or New York for United Nations because terrorists have struck, what that tells you then is that the terrorists have won, because that's essentially what they want, to undermine governance and thwart normalcy. So, but to say president is not attached, I think that, and I also spoke about this document that we have put together, enunciating all of the things that the president has done. And there also is a big discussion on the social investment program, the biggest on the continent. Something that had led to increased school enrollment, because more than 10 million children get a meal a day when they grow. And today, as we speak, this country had statistically between 12 to 14 million out of school children. And I'm sorry, again, the previous gentleman, Wale, said 20 million. That is outrageous. It doesn't exist anywhere outside his own imagination. The success of the administration is in the fact that this has been lowered to 8 million. It is not over. It is an ongoing process. There's so many programs of government.
Well, it does happen that, I mean, Mr. Garba Shehu was still speaking. I don't know if you can hear us now.
Young people, cheap access to cheap capital for startups, all these things to speak to kind-heartedness. It cannot be said that this president is detached.
Well, Mr. Garba Shehu, I think that, the people of Nigeria will continue to assess the president from how they experienced his own leadership. Those who believe that, his personality and his style of governance explains how he ran things, they have their own opinion. Those who also, think that that's how it should be run will also have their own opinion. But I think a majority of Nigerians will explain or would assess the Buhari administration in terms of how they experienced him. And largely, for a number of people, when it comes to issues of disaster, insecurity, very rarely did we see the president visiting people as a result of this sort of occurrences. Even the recent floods, are one of the issues that immediately come to mind. But let me take you back to the issue of electricity, which you have disputed. You've talked about megawatts being increased. Indeed, we saw over the course of this administration attempts to increase, build infrastructure, strengthen infrastructure around generation and transmission, which seem to have been a major problem. We've also seen, attempts to try and buoy the capacity of distribution companies by granting them loans, more or less, or let's say, loans or grants, if you will, just to ensure that they stay in business. However, the experience of a lot of Nigerians when it comes to electricity, apart from the major cities of Lagos and maybe Abuja, for a number of people living in rural Nigeria or a lot of other states, and I'm not talking about the capitals, even the capitals of this state, the experiences will definitely differ. What they have felt in their homes has been very different from what was promised. So when you talk to these people about megawatts that have been generated, vis-a-vis the experiences of people, there are huge questions as to what exactly the Buhari administration achieved.
Well, we have achieved a lot. As I said, quantitatively, availability has increased 20,000 megawatts. That's enormous. And even transmission, which you said was a problem, is actually not essentially the problem, because transmission has also been enhanced from about 5,000 megawatts to between 7,000 to 8,000, capacity. That's
to modify. Sorry to interrupt you. Perhaps I should modify my question. Do you have a way of would I say measuring just how much electricity was delivered to each Nigerian home over the course of the Buhari administration?
Of course, there is. Because when I spoke about distribution earlier, I said on record, the best of times you had up to 1,000 megawatts. 25,000 was the norm. 2,500 was the norm. 3,000 was exceptional. Today, the norm is between 4,000 to 5,000. And why is it so? It is because, as you know yourself, that these distribution companies had been sold to incompetence. People who thought this was another cheap money, and I'm sorry to say, some new MTN or Econet, that money would just be dropping it without investing just anything in metering. So what happens is they are called upon to take power, and they said they won't take power because if they take power, they have to pay for it, and they lack the capacity to distribute. And these owners have been so fortified by, so insulated in what they have been dashed by administrations before our own, that it is difficult. But I speak to you today, I'm sure up to 50% of the discourse have been recovered one way or the other by government using due processes. And the new owners, as you have just seen in Abuja, going to transport, it's going to happen all around the country, because people who had no experience, who had no hint of how this could be done. When we came in, recovery was just 15% of power issued to them, 15%. How can you go unsubsidized by 75%? As much as effort is being done, we're still hovering between 35 to 40% of recovery. Taking power without payment. And some of their owners, even ordinary board meetings, they go to Dubai and Hawaii, islands that they have to go and junket and enjoy themselves. This country deserves a better deal. And this is what the administration is doing now.
So while all of that backroom work was going on to try and see how the distribution companies could be resuscitated and transmission could be strengthened, what I'm asking is, did this administration have a mechanism to see how much electricity each Nigerian home was getting? How many hours per day, for instance, the average Nigerian home was getting? That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, there's the metering scheme. The metering scheme is regimented. There are parts, or you mentioned there are some parts of Lagos and you said Abuja. Yeah, there are parts of Nigeria today that pay for 24-hour electricity supply. And the ones who get 8 hours per day, they don't pay in their charges as much as those who enjoy. So it's a graduated scheme. There are people who pay
system, Mr. Garba, Shehu. I'm also a citizen of Nigeria, and I happen to live somewhere in this country. So yes, I do know about the graduated way that homes are built and areas are built. We even have areas that have reached some private agreements with discos and are willing to pay a premium so they can get more electricity. But even in those places, 24-hour electricity is not guaranteed. So I'm asking for the very rural areas, those under the parity or R4 scheme, is there a way we are measuring to say, on an average, we want to be able to deliver, say, 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours a day as the minimum to a Nigerian home? Do we have a way of measuring that?
Why are you so? I don't want to say why so mean? Why 2 hours? Why 3 hours? That's certainly below what a national average should look like. I think that we're a serious country. And look
Indeed, we are a serious country. We should be a serious company, Mr. Garba. Well, as I speak to you, even some areas in Lagos, as I speak to you, have not seen electricity for up to 2 weeks. There are places that are in total darkness. They don't even know when the next electricity supply will come to them. So do we have a way of, this is in spite of how many megawatts. So when we talk about megawatts, it really doesn't make any difference to them. I mean, they don't understand what it is we're talking about because they haven't seen any electricity in their homes. Do we have a way, are the discos being held accountable in such a way that we know that the end user is the most important person along the scheme, and we should have a way of measuring how much electricity each Nigerian home is getting on a weekly basis? That's what I'm asking.
Well, the discos are being checked, and this is why some of them are being sent out of the business, and the business be recovered and be sold to new owners. Now, as you want me to tell you exactly what measurement, what data is there to measure how many hours is there?
Well, it's okay if we don't have it. I mean, I think that. Some people will say, if we don't have it, we don't have it. Because at the end of the day, the consumer should have been at the heart of all of the investment that was made in the power sector. And there has to be a way of checking if the consumer is really getting all of the benefits of government investment in that particular sector. Yes, there'll also be arguments around rural electrification process and seeing how that has, succeeded in some parts of the country. But let me take you up on another issue, the farmer herdsmen crisis, which is where another very sore area for a number of people. With benefit of hindsight, over the 8 years of this administration, do you think that particular matter, which became extremely touchy, do you think it could have been handled better?
Well, first of all, let me go back to your power issue. The real test of what gets to people is in getting people to say how they feel about all of these things. And I'm sure your network, if not it, so many other networks have done these things. They're going to talk to tailors and welders and who say, we were getting these numbers of hours before, and now this is what we are getting, and talking about improvement generally. So to go to your own question on farmer herders club, please, let's make the admission that it's the historical problem. I have read pre-colonial and post-colonial literature on some of these things. These things had existed even then, and there were problems that were being transmitted from Nigeria to the Queen's Court in the UK. Farmers and herders had always fought because the land space is shrinking, and water is getting less and less, and so therefore there's more competition for grazing land because farming is increasing, population growing exponentially, and so therefore more need for farmland and this. But the First Republic, had the grazing routes from the end of the country in the north down to the delta and to the sea.
Shehu, I'm trying to bring you, I'm so sorry that, I need to bring you back to the present. I'm talking about the 8 years. Yes, we can appreciate the historical antecedents of this particular problem, but putting all of that in mind and how the Buhari administration handled the particular issue, would you say that it could have done better? That's the question I'm asking.
There's always room for improvement. Nobody will come before you and say we have achieved perfection. But do you know that this administration has put in place a policy that had not existed before, and for states that have embraced it, the National Livestock Transformation Plan, NLTP, is the perfect solution agreed to by governors of all of the states and the federal government, saying this is the way to go. Some states are still difficult about it. A few states had embarked upon it, and the federal government had come to their support. And a lot of change is happening. The change would probably not come in 1 or 2 days or a week or so, but the processes have begun. In Niger, Katsina, Borno, Yobe, there are quite a number of states that have chosen that path. Adamawa as well, the vice president was there to launch it. So the choices the states make largely determine how much progress is made, because under our own constitution, the land belongs to the state and the federal government has no control over it.
Mr. Garba, so one of the things, I just have one question for you, and boss, more or less like sitting on this statement, I belong to no one and I belong to everyone. That's one of the key statements the president made on his inauguration in 2015. Now, when the president took office, and indeed during the campaign, at the back of the minds of most Nigerians, especially the common folk in Nigeria, is the fact that we have a president who is a man that will fight corruption, who is above board when it comes to fighting corruption, and he will ensure that all those who are stealing our public funds are dealt with. Would you say that that has been effectively done in terms of fighting corruption and transparency in government? Because there are arguments in different quarters that in this administration, many who should have gone to jail are walking the streets free of charge, and many who cannot account for their wealth are suddenly wealthier than they were before they came into office. How would you say this administration has fared in the area of transparency and fight against corruption?
Well, if you ask the president this question, he will equally tell you he's baffled by the fact that people who otherwise would have been in jail are riding their Rolls Royces and their aircraft and freely, roaming around. Under our constitution, the president can, the executive arm under the president can only investigate and prosecute. I'm not here to blame judiciary for whatever has gone wrong. All the problems may be prosecutorial or whatever, or investigative. However, the moment the executive arm takes this matter to court, his job is done, and it is up to the courts to determine whether one is guilty or not. Under this administration, you know that the highest official in the nation's parliament had been prosecuted for corruption-related matters. The highest person in the nation's court system, the judiciary, had been prosecuted. The highest person, the third highest person in the executive arm of government is still undergoing trial. So the president is still what he is still above board as his spokesperson. I go to bed soundly, I sleep soundly, convinced that nobody, whether from Nigeria or outside the country, the journalists will call you and say, we have discovered this bank account and your boss has these huge millions. That's not Buhari. So he's well above scandal, and that's the way it will end.
Garba Shehu, because, as we have said here, Malkwe reiterated to you, perception and reality, the lines are very, very blurred. But at this time, we have to thank you very much for being a part of our conversation and responding to our questions. Garba Shehu is Senior Special Assistant on Media and Publicity in the Office of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and all the best.